The opioid epidemic can be blamed on so many things. It really can. You can sort of trace this to all kinds of things that created a perfect storm. But those are things. There is a group of people that have blood literally all over their hands. And it's amazing because the number of people who are going to go to prison today for drug dealing, who made $1,000, or $2,000. We're talking about a family that made $34 billion peddling drugs that has caused the death of, right now, depending on who you believe, pretty close to 1 million people have died from the opioid epidemic. And the opioid epidemic has a face, right? It is there is a group of people, one family in particular, called the Sackler family. It's probably not a name that most people have heard of, and it's because they didn't call the drug OxyContin, right? They did everything they could to put their name as far away from this as possible, and I'll get into some of the things they did to really distance themselves from all of this. But the Sackler family were the people who brought you the opioid epidemic. I mean, no two ways about it. And the amazing thing is, this isn't their first go around. The Sackler family started out with three brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond. These guys were all psychiatrists. And between the three of them, they had written over 100 papers on the biochemistry of drugs when it comes to mental issues. They pooled their finances together and they bought a little pharmaceutical company that wasn't doing a whole lot at the time. And this is not back in 1952. And the name of the company was Purdue Pharmaceuticals. Really not much of a company at that point. But Arthur Sackler became more of a marketer than anything else. And he was the first person to go to JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, and talk them into a full color brochure for a drug, which had never been done before, right? And based on the 100 papers that he and his brother had written, they thought, wow, we'll give the guy a chance. And he was releasing a new drug, right? And it was the first drug ever to break the $100 million mark. And the name of the drug was Valium. He had a really cool concept. If you look at it purely from a marketing standpoint, this was a great concept. He came up with a way of marketing this stuff by using a different form of marketing. Basically, this normally was something that would be prescribed for one thing and one thing only, right? This was an anxiety disorder medication. But what he did is he came up with a couple of cool names like stress disorder, right? Which was different at the time than anything anyone had ever heard. And the nice thing about stress disorder was names like that, or his favorite, which was psychic tension. There was no way to diagnose psychic tension. So it was the first time ever that somebody walked in and said, I'm looking for Valium. Up to that point, no one had ever gone to a doctor and requested a medication. You would go in, tell the doctor what was wrong. The doctor would write you a prescription. But with psychic tension, right, and stress disorder out there, people were going in and saying, you know what, I'm not getting along with my husband. I would like Valium. And he was the genius who said, we should make the 5 milligram ones for ladies and make them yellow, because I think that it's a more marketable color to women. I mean, this is really the depth that this man went to. And over $100 million was made on this drug in the 50s and early 60s. And it put Arthur on the map. He was inducted in the early 60s into the, believe it or not, there is a Hall of Fame for this, the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame. The Medical Advertising Hall of Fame. What he did was enslave a huge portion of the population. He got them addicted to Valium. And I think there was enough, sort of a ripple of bad publicity through all of this that Arthur backed off. And they, basically enjoyed their billions of dollars that they had made. And that basically stayed the way it was until the 1980s. And there was a brand new type of medicine out there that we take for granted because you've heard it your whole life, but hospice, right? Treating people who were dying and making their last days on earth, something that was a little bit more tolerable, was a brand new concept, especially for people with cancer. And they needed a drug that would help these people sleep. a pain medication that would last longer than, say, 4 or 5 hours. Because obviously 4 or 5 hours of sleep, if you wake up, hurting and you take meds, you could be looking at an hour before you get relief. And these people who were dying couldn't get even a halfway decent night's sleep. So they came up with a drug called MS-Contin. The term Contin makes reference to anything that the Sackler family and Purdue had come up with that was a time-release formula. MS was for morphine sulfate. And this became the gold standard for treating people who were dying. And you know what? It was a hell of a drug. It really was. It was a perfect drug for a perfect usage. You didn't have to worry if these people got addicted. They weren't going to live long enough for that to be an issue. But it made the end of their life tolerable. And it got a lot of really good publicity for Purdue Pharmaceutical. However, unhappy with the amount of money that they were making, which was in the hundreds of millions, but not the billions, they turned the reins over to Arthur's nephew. His name was Richard. And if you want to call him Dick, I'm cool with that. Richard decided that he was going to do everything within his power to start selling morphine sulfate content in a time-released formula to people who did not have cancer. And he was able to break that out of the hospice treatment and into the mainstream. And he did this through the use of a lot of people at the Food and Drug Administration. And this is something you're going to see that is a recurring theme with the people at Purdue Pharmaceutical. They managed to get really good relationships with the people at the Food and Drug Administration. On one occasion, a guy that left the Food and Drug Administration after approving OxyContin, 2 years later took a huge job with Purdue Pharmaceutical. If that doesn't stink like something is wrong, then you're not really giving it a whole lot of thought, right? For a government agent to walk away from a government job and instantly start working for the people he was approving stinks. I mean, there's absolutely no two ways about it. It stinks. But there was a lot of people who viewed MS-Contin as a way to treat people who were dying. And for that reason, when doctors said, well, we're going to try to put you on MS-Contin, they'd go, that's that end of life stuff that you guys have been doing all of the hospice. Yeah, I don't want to take that. Why don't we stick with something a little different that I'm not dying. I'm not doing this. So Richard wanted to take the Contin formula and move it into something else. And he got people at the FDA to basically sign off on the fact that oxycodone, right, the main ingredient in Percocet, was a far less dangerous drug than morphine sulfate. In spite of the fact that it is 50 times stronger, they got people at the FDA to approve for use in people up to, as low as the age of 11. Right when OxyContin came out in the early 90s, it was approved for people as young as 11 years old. Again, courtesy of the Food and Drug Administration. They started pumping this stuff out, and at the time, there was an article done that we've talked about on the Lifeboat 100 times. Right, this is the Porter Glick article. It was written for the New England Journal of Medicine, where they stated that opiates, right, had a 1% abuse rate among the people who took them. This was absolute horse crap, but it didn't stop 600 publications from quoting that study. The whole time this study was being quoted, the guy that wrote it was, busy doing what he was doing for a living and had no clue that a letter he had written was being quoted as if it was a study. It wasn't. It was a letter he wrote that said, yeah, I tracked 400 people, and of the people I wrote these prescriptions to, only about 1% got addicted. That's not a study. There's no double blind. There's no nothing. But the Porter Glick study, which wasn't a study, got quoted again in 600 journals. It got quoted in the literature for Purdue Pharmaceutical as they started to pump out OxyContin. And you know that when somebody designs a drug, they have a period of time that they own that patented drug before anyone else can make a generic formula, right? Which is just making the exact same drug and selling it under any name. That is so that you can recoup all of the money that it took to make the drug. Well, the really funny thing is they got a very long window to recoup all of the money that it took to make OxyContin, which is really funny because all they did was take oxycodone and use the contin release formula, which had already been developed. They didn't need to recoup any money on that a second time. But somebody at the FDA went, yeah, take 10, 12 years and recoup all of the money that you want on that. So Richard, being the Richard that he is, started to micromanage everything about how this was marketed. He used to put out these massive reports and send them to all of the pharmaceutical reps. And inside it, like you're reading right along, and it would say, call my secretary and tell her the word demon, or call my secretary and tell her the word Ferrari. And these people would call up and go, I don't know why, but in the literature, it said, call you and say Ferrari. He micromanaged so much. He wanted to know who was reading his articles and who wasn't. The people that were reading the articles got the really cush jobs, like West Virginia, right? Like Ohio. When people say, what is it about these parts of the country? Why is the drug addiction so bad there? Well, because Dick Sackler realized that this was blue collar America. These people had tons of online injuries. So pill mills got set up in all of these small rural towns so that the doctors could start writing prescriptions to anybody that had been injured at work. And believe it or not, folks, they got to a point where in many cases, the number of prescriptions that had been written in these places were up to 2 times the size of the population of the town, right? Imagine a town of 60,000 people and 120,000 prescriptions for OxyContin written. It really makes you start to wonder. And over a 5-year period of time, they went from 300,000 scripts a year to 6 million scripts a year. They stepped up their marketing like you wouldn't believe. That you can't pay a doctor to write a prescription for OxyContin. It's against the law. You can pay them to make speeches about why OxyContin is a good drug. And they started to pay these people ridiculous money to go around and make speeches for Purdue. Most of the time, there was no speech. It was a vacation and a very large check, where they started to do these outings where they were going to train people on the correct use of OxyContin and how to write a prescription for it, for the appropriate stuff. And they would fly entire families into the Bahamas, and it was literally an assembly line. The people that were doing these, putting on these seminars, so to speak, they didn't even go home. They would stay there, do one. The next week, there'd be a whole new crew there. The next week, there'd be a whole new crew there. And they just stayed there, cranking out armies of doctors who went out and started writing scripts for this. And along the way, they took pharmaceutical reps, the people that went out and visited doctors' offices and handed them bags full of free OxyContin and said, give these to your patients with a coupon so that they don't pay for the first month. Now, not only is that great marketing, it's evil as hell. Because at the time that they were saying it had a 1% chance of addiction, Purdue Pharmaceutical knew that the real number was 13%, right? Internal memos have proven that Richard Sackler knew that it was 13 times higher than what they were putting in their literature. There is evidence, people, no joke evidence, that when the first round of overdose and accidental death numbers came in for OxyContin, and they came in and said, there's 60 some odd thousand deaths that have been attributed to this. Richard Sackler said, really? I honestly thought it would be worse than that. Wrap your brain around the evil that it takes to knowingly pump out a product that you think will kill more than 65,000 people and just chalk that up to the cost of doing business, knowing ahead of time. Now, look, if you take any abusable substance, throw alcohol in there, any abusable substance that you can get addicted to, the standard, the accepted standard for what the addictive property rate is. In other words, you give alcohol to X number of people. For most drugs, 3% of the people who use it are going to hit full-blown addiction. And that's with any substance. So when you've got one that's at 13%, you know that what you have is heinously addicting. Yet you continue to put out literature that says less than 1% of the people that take this are even going to find themselves getting addicted. There's an amazing video that was done called I Got My Life Back. And there's a doctor in there talking about how it's a myth that opiates are addicting. A myth. And he talked about one patient after another and how these people were able to get their life back through the wonder of OxyContin. I'll give you two guesses who put out that video, right? And I watched it yesterday. It'll make you ill. Purdue Pharmaceutical filmed that, right? And paid doctors to come in and basically knowingly lie through their teeth. Now, whether the doctors were in on it, at that level in the beginning, because there are doctors who absolutely have come out and said, I believe the literature. As soon as my patients started saying to me, boy, this stuff, I can't seem to stop, there were doctors who instantly pumped the brakes. And Purdue Pharmaceutical very carefully looked at every single doctor and how many prescriptions they were writing. Now, you would think every pharmaceutical company should do that, because if you find somebody who's writing, say, 70 prescriptions a day, it's not possible to sit down and talk to 70 people a day and diagnose what's wrong with them and write them a prescription. So obviously this is a pill mill. But see, Purdue wasn't doing it for that reason. They were doing it so that they knew which doctors they could cut larger deals with. They knew which doctors to send more free samples to and which doctors to give coupons to that they could give away so that your first 90 days of OC are free. If that's not drug dealing, what the hell is? Honestly. It's like any dealer on the street. Take 5 of them. This is on me, man. Go home. No, not a problem. It's on the house. They did this drug dealing at a worldwide level, right? And the money started to roll in trucks. I'm not exaggerating, people. The amount of money that they began to make, by halfway through OxyContin's run, they had made $18 billion selling something. And you talk about a guaranteed product, what everybody you're selling to gets addicted, right? The latest reports from the Center for Disease Control says that 4 out of 5 intravenous drug users in this country started off on pills. That was not the case before the Sackler family. You realize that? Literally, they invented this phenomenon. And while they did, they got rich. And they gave tons of money away to the arts, basically. The Guggenheim Museum in New York got a pile of money. There is a very famous church in Westminster Cathedral, and they have the Sackler window. It's a huge stained glass window in the front that they donated to. There are museums all over the world that have the Sackler wing, right? They just gave away all of this money so that they could look cool and look philanthropic, while they literally killed hundreds of thousands of people knowingly. Now, it got worse, right? All of a sudden, the bad press started to roll in, and there were a lot of people in government talking about something needs to get done, right? The number of deaths, when it hit the 100 deaths a day mark, it was declared by our previous president an epidemic, right? A national drug crisis in this country at 100 a day. Well, how did it take that long? How did we not do it before 100 people a day? Well, the answer to that is $900 million. That's what was donated to politicians, right? $900 million. Again, it's a drug dealer, except instead of paying off the cops, the local cops that could come and bust you, they were paying off the big dogs. They were paying off the people that could write laws to stop what they were doing. And this just continued and continued. And as the numbers piled up, you think that the Sacklers might have pumped the brakes. Right? Maybe they would have started to realize just how destructive this property was. However, that's not the direction that they went in. In fact, they went the complete opposite direction. When the press got horrendous and people started screaming for somebody's head on a platter, they went to Congress themselves and they said, the drug OxyContin is dangerous in the form it's in. We realize we've made some mistakes and we're going to make some changes to it. And what they did was they made it so that you couldn't snort it, right? And they made it so you couldn't shoot it. When you mix water into the new recipe, it goes poof, and the pill literally turns into what looks like a hamburger, right? It just swells up. You can never get it into a needle. You can't snort it. You could no longer smoke it, right? It looked like they were really trying to help. However, people continued to die. Now, doesn't really make sense, right? If you couldn't concentrate the stuff into its more potent form by crushing up the cotton, then how is that possible? Well, what they did was they released a 30 milligram version of it that didn't have any of those protections in it. Why not? Why would you not put those protections into the 30 milligram pill, right? Which you call Percocet, but you do it to the OxyContin, but not the time released Percocet, which is an OxyContin. They left that in there for the dope users. They left that in there for the people that were getting high, but they showed up and they cleaned up their name a little bit by changing the formula of OxyContin. Sounded good, didn't it? Well, as the press got worse and that didn't get it done, they went for the absolute ultimate in dirtbag. They showed up in Congress and said, with a few years left on the patent of OxyContin, they showed up and said, you were right the first time. This drug should not be manufactured, period. This is a dangerous drug. We're going to recommend that nobody should ever be allowed to make this. Now, what all that did was it bought Purdue 5 more years of being able to crank out OxyContin with no competition. Congress, I'm sure after being greased by every single politician out there, voted that no one should be able to make a generic version of this drug, right? Anybody making a generic would have to cease and desist, and Purdue Pharmaceutical would have the rights to this stuff. Knowing they're killing people, they wanted to ride out just a little bit more cash, which got to 34 and some change, almost $35 billion. And the lawsuits started coming in. And the lawsuits started piling up. They started coming in from states. They started coming in from people. And I'll tell you something. If I sound a little pissed, I got OxyContin. I was one of the people who, when this stuff was really cooking, I was going to a pain management doctor in Salt Lake City, Utah. And they wrote, find your own dose. Literally, that's what the prescription said. They gave me 5s, 20s, 30s, right? And said, find your own dose. And I remember coming back and saying to the doctor, a woman that was about 4 feet tall, really short woman, I went back in and said, the amount I'm taking is just ridiculous. You're not going to write a prescription for this, but you told me, she said, what are you taking? I said, 15 a day, 15 80s. She went, wrote a prescription for 15 80s a day. When I took it to the pharmacy the first time and I handed it to the pharmacist, he said to me, I can't fill this. I've told the story on the lifeboat before. I said, why can't you fill it? He said, I cannot fill a prescription for more than 30 days at a time because it's a Schedule II narcotic. And I said, this is a 30-day prescription. And he went, oh, okay. Yeah, I'll fill it for you. And I sat down and, started doing stuff on the phone. And like a minute later, the police cars came rolling in and the cops came running into the lobby, basically freaking out. Which one is it? Him. And they came over and the guy was like, well, I want to know where you got that. The doctor showed up in the lobby and just started screaming at people. It is, I don't blame this doctor. I really don't. I blame the Sacklers. They got people to believe that human beings had a right to never hurt, that we had a God-given right to never feel pain of any kind. Why the hell would you allow an 11-year-old to get this drug? Truthfully, if you start, and I don't mean that an 11-year-old should not have, pain medication, no matter how, if they're hurting, you should treat them. But an OxyContin 80, I mean, how much do you weigh at 11 years old? You think there's a kid out there that truthfully needed Oxy 80s? But this mindset that no one should ever have to feel pain of any kind permeated every single part of the medical, community. And the number of doctors who are sitting in prison because they wrote prescriptions for OxyContin, like I said earlier, literally, there were towns, especially West Virginia was horrendous. Parts of Florida were even worse, where the population of the town was 20,000, and they had written 250,000 prescriptions for OxyContin. So you sit there and go, how is that friggin' possible? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, didn't they change the actual questions the doctors had to ask by law?
Oh, yeah. They absolutely did. There's nobody listening to the sound of my voice right now who has not seen the chart that said with the faces that they go from, right? I just did an 80 to, oh, miserable. Okay. That was the Sackler family that came up with that. because now, people used to come in and they were very hesitant to say to a doctor, they always felt like they were trying to, they didn't want to sound like they were working anyone. Now you just had this cool little thing you had to point out. Where are you on this list? I'm that guy right there. Okay, OxyContin. How much do you need? Literally. I mean, they attack this at virtually every level, and it is the gold standard now, is it not? You go to a hospital, you go to an emergency room, you go anywhere, and they say, "What is your pain level on a scale from 1 to 10?" And they hand you this little sheet with all the funny little faces on it, right? Mark nailed it. This didn't occur prior to the Sacklers and Purdue Pharmaceutical.
My GP actually told me that when he was in school, because he was getting out of school right when all this was happening.
Right.
And he told me that before, because he had a class one year, and then the next year they changed it because of this. And they had to treat your pain down to 0.
Correct.
There was no, hey, yeah, I can feel a little bit of pain, or heck, we all feel a bit of pain. You walk down the street, you go back home, you sit down, your feet start to swell a little bit, like me and Tommy were just talking, and boop, boop,
Yep.
boop, 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 boop. That's a little bit of pain. They're telling you, no, you don't have to feel that no more. And this is
correct. It's a God-given right that you do not have to endure pain at any level. They were doing everything within their power to bring people's pain to a 0. And it got to a point where the literature was so deceptive, people, that you honestly can't blame every doctor out there. There were dentists who were taking out people's teeth. And since the dawn of man, you would get, 15 Percocets, right, to deal with the pain of having your molars taken out. And you would take those home, and that's the prescription you got. Well, they're telling these people it's the same drug, but the contin formula makes it less addicting. Where did they get that? Well, the people at the FDA swore to it right before taking a job at Purdue Pharmaceutical. But they really truthfully believe, doctors across the board believed, that in a time-released version, this was a drug that wasn't going to get people addicted. There were doctors out there that thought, thank God, right? This is what we have been waiting for since medicine started. A non-addicting pain medication. If the literature was right,